Welcome back to another episode of the Pelvic Perspective podcast. So today is going to be an interesting conversation. I am excited for it. I feel like I might fit into this, so she might be talking about me a little bit. So
yeah. Both of us are going to feel very told on today.
Feel a little bit like, why are you talking about me? But today I have with me a dear friend. She is absolutely amazing. Jennifer Hammer, and she is a licensed professional counselor of over 16 years. She helps people pleasers. I'm a reformed people pleaser. Caretakers, perfectionists. We're still working on that, but she helps them find balance and peace in their relationships. She's also super brilliant, y'all. And she is a continuing education specialist. She's a clinical supervisor. She helps new clinicians getting into the field. Especially those who want to work with these particular clients. So chronic illness, pain, and to challenge ableism in the medical field. So y'all, today we're talking about the intersection of all things people pleasers, caretakers, perfectionists, and chronic illness and pain. And y'all know I love pain science. So without further ado, I'm going to try not to feel like my feelings are hurt when Jen starts talking about me.
Listen, I know, right? Me too. Everything that I'm going to say today, please know it comes from like love and compassion and self-diagnosis. So I am in it. This is me. I'm a recovering workaholic, recovering perfectionist, people pleaser, caretaker, all of the above. So please note, sometimes I can sound a little sarcastic, but please note that my intent is incredibly compassionate for the struggles that we have. So I am super excited to be here to share today.
Well, let's get started by, nobody wants people around them to feel bad, or nobody wants to be the mean one, right? So how do we, when we're talking about people pleasers, what are we really talking about? Because, some people might hear this and think, well, I'm not a people pleaser. I'm just a really nice person.
Yeah. Funny, my superlative was like nicest person in high school. So yeah. So chances are, if you think you're just a really nice person, we should probably take a look. So and again, people pleasing isn't awful, right? We need community, we need consideration, we need to think about other people in relationships. Where I determine the crossover to people pleasing as problematic behavior is when it really is at sacrifice of self. So I think that when we have a pattern of making that decision, that becomes problematic. Okay, doing it one time, not a big deal. All right. Like, we need to do that. That's how we balance our relationships. I can't always be me focused in a relationship. That's not going to fly. But when we consistently make that decision to sacrifice ourselves or what would be best for us for the other person, and then that results in problematic issues, whatever that may be. So that's how I define people pleasing.
And so that leads me to my next favorite word, boundaries.
I love boundaries. The queen of boundaries is Nedra Tawwab Glover, who is amazing.
Oh, she is good. Her book is amazing.
So good. So good.
I'll put a link for that in the show notes, y'all. If you haven't read it, if you have no boundaries, go get you some.
Well, and as most perfectionist caretakers and people pleasers, you don't have the time to read a book. Her social media is great too.
Yeah.
So follow her on Instagram.
Good point. So what does it mean, though, for people pleasers? Because when it gets to the point where it becomes an issue, when it gets to the point where instead of, if we're thinking, well, I'm a nice person, I'm doing all these nice things for the other person, when we hear that, we think, oh, well, there shouldn't be a problem. Why then are there issues? And why then could that translate to issues in relationships, whether personal, intimate, professional, and so on?
Yeah, it tends to become problematic because if you're constantly sacrificing for the other person, your needs and your wants aren't getting attended to at all. We're wanting to alternate. So for example, when we're thinking about particularly like healthcare type stuff, right? People pleasers will have a tendency to not necessarily focus on what they need to be able to do to get healthy, or they'll agree to something that may not be the best for them. So if we apply it to like the healthcare setting, let's say we've got a people pleaser who maybe is in a relationship, a long-term romantic relationship with someone who is like, well, I actually need a ride to work today, and they have their PT appointment at 10, and they're like, okay, well, I'll give you a ride to work, and then they don't make it to their PT appointment. Right. So what we tend to find is that you'll see a consistent pattern of choosing something other than that, which of course will affect healthcare. It typically builds resentment in relationships because when people pleasers do say like, hey, I need something, and the other person's like, no, I can't. And they're like, oh my God, like all of these years I've been doing this, and why wouldn't you give me this one thing? But the other person, for whatever reason. Now it's also very important to know people pleasers tend to get into relationships. This is going to come out a little loaded here, so hang with me, folks. People pleasers tend to get into relationships if they don't have good boundaries. They tend to get into relationships with people who need someone else to do things for them. So if we haven't examined the people pleasing, they tend to get into relationships with folks who need other people to please them. And that can be problematic. Yeah. You gotta safely go forth into relationships.
Downward spiral there, downward spiral. So when we think about addressing that, I mean, how do they even start? If you've been people pleasing all your life, you don't have a boundary, you don't know how to spell the word, you don't even know, you've never heard the word, and you're 50. Like, which at this point in time, we'll probably need some prayer there too. But what does that person even begin to do to start to address this?
Well, for many people pleasers, if you ask them what do they need or what do they want, that's an incredibly difficult question. So oftentimes if they are able to ask the question, you'll sort of hear it from like the third party perspective. So like, well, I need to go pick up my kids, or I need to go take care of this, or I would like to do this, but you'll hear sort of some of those things. So if anyone relates to that, hi, welcome to the club, type of thing. So I start with like need and want identification. Again, for healthy relationships, we don't want to become me-centered, which can be sometimes the biggest fear of a people pleaser. But I'm not too worried about it, but some folks are, and that's fine. I'm not saying like for myself, I'm not worried about it for other people pleasers. Very rarely do people pleasers like become, selfish jerks. It doesn't typically happen. So really focusing in on like, what do you need and what do you want? Acknowledging what they are, and then trying to see what we can do to get them. But the first step is you got to know what you need and know what you want.
But what if I don't know what I want? What if all I want is for you to be happy? That's all I want. Does that sound really familiar?
Very familiar. Very familiar. Absolutely. That, and I think, we bring into a lot of cultural like messages and intergenerational messages, right? We've heard a lot of that growing up. Yeah. Sometimes too. And so that can be really hard. But I also like to look like long-term here. Like, do I ultimately want my children to be happy and healthy? Absolutely. But it's not all within our control, because I'm not going to be the only person within our lives. You're putting all your eggs in a basket that you cannot control. You can't maintain where the basket is standing. I'm not giving my 3-year-old a basket of eggs. That's going to be a really bad idea. So while I want to have the other person happy, that really puts a lot of our control outside of the things that we can actually control.
Mm-hmm. And how does this tie into perfectionists? How does this tie in? Because when you think of a perfectionist, or at least for me, it doesn't necessarily sound like a people pleaser, right? Like it's like, oh, well, I'm just singularly focused. But now, where is the intersection there?
Yeah, I've really grown to lump everyone together. And this is just through years of practice. Okay. So I've really found that typically if one is there, the other ones are too. Right. That's not hard and fast, tried and true necessarily, but in very, very big terms, that's typically there. Most perfectionists what you'll kind of find is that the people pleasing part, what that connects to is a good outcome, a perfect outcome, a happy outcome. So usually it's later down the road. If we handle this perfectly, then everyone will be happy. And that's typically how I see it connected, right? Then if we pop over to the caretaking piece, the people please, well, usually they are in that relationship where they have to care for another person. Now that is not like always intentional, right? There are things that just occur in our family of origin or in our family of choice where we need to care for folks, right? It's just you'll see that overlap with that, or they are in a family system where they need to care for people, and we'll see the perfectionism and the people pleasing become problematic in the caretaking relationship.
So I'm almost thinking about this too from a couple of different lenses. When we think about people pleaser, it's one, the mom, the parent, right? Because
Yep.
God bless us, we try our best, but it's all about these babies, and so we end up in that cycle. And so you have a little bit of that, which you're trying to balance with mom guilt. Well, if I don't do this, then I am a bad mom, right?
Yeah.
Like, how did we get there in society?
Well, I mean, society's never really been kind to women. So, right, you add in all the other, issues that like affect that for sure. But, so part of that, we do get that external message, right? Where particularly you're expected to work as if you're not in this other caretaking role, whether that's a parent or some other type of caretaking. But yet then you're also expected to work as if you're not a parent or a caretaker. And then you're also expected to caretake or parent like you're not a worker. So one, society sets us up to fail anyways. And then if we're believing in that's our part. That's the perfectionist, the caretaker, the people pleaser part, which is really hard to sort out because it's a very covert message. It's a very sort of like insidious message. It's no one will come and say like, I'm I can't believe you didn't, work harder on this project. Like people will say, and they won't say, I can't believe you left early because your kid was sick. They'll say like, I just don't think you're as committed. It's very covert. When you're like, well, what makes you think that? Then you can kind of get in there. And that's a lot of the work when we are challenging our own sort of people pleasing and caretaking and perfectionism. A lot of it is about like, well, what does that mean? Why do I think that? Why do I feel, okay, I feel guilt. Okay, guilt means I did something wrong. Okay, guilt's great. Like I love it when humans have guilt. Like that's not a bad thing. Shame is problematic, right? So guilt is I did something bad, shame is I am bad. So, if as a mom, let's say, if as a mom you did something bad, like I yelled at my kid yesterday. Not good. Now I felt guilty. Absolutely. Am I bad because I slipped in that moment? No, I apologized. I repaired. I was like, gosh, I really like, I lost it. And I'm really sorry about that. I was very like overwhelmed and that wasn't okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we want to differentiate between that. But I think in particular, we get lots of messages about what makes someone either a good caretaker, a good people please, like a good person, a good whatever, insert whatever role
Mm-hmm.
you want to insert. And we have to sort of deconstruct that for ourselves.
What about with aging parents? Because I come from a culture in the Caribbean. If you're listening and you're West Indian, you understand, like, we don't, this whole nursing home thing is very new, right? Like,
Yep.
you don't put your parents in a nursing home. You feel like you will be haunted in like to all
Yep.
the depths after
Yep.
you leave this earth. And
Yep.
so, but we also get into circumstances where there's usually in many families where there's not a cohesive unit, one person that everything falls on.
Yep.
Right. So when persons are dealing with those situations, because it's like, well, if I don't do it, my family member parent suffers. So I
Yeah.
have to do it because the rest of these folks over here,
Yeah.
you can't count on.
Yeah, y'all can't see me like jumping around in my seat right now because you're absolutely right. And I like, 9 times out of 10, I'm gonna guess that person is the perfectionist, the caretaker, and the people pleaser. And that's partly, anytime we're talking relationship stuff, I don't believe it can be 100% anyone. It's always going to be a percentage of each. So if it's a 2-person relationship, 50-50 for that. So when you think about like a family dynamic, the person who that typically lands on is the person who is the perfectionist, the caretaker, and the people pleaser. Now, we can get into some birth order stuff. Like, is it the oldest?
Usually.
Quite a bit. Right. But that's part of that dynamic for perfectionist caretakers and people pleasers is it can be unchecked. Is it true? Like I said earlier, we tend to get into relationships where people are needing that from you. Right. So that is part of it. Like people pleasers, perfectionists, and caretakers end up getting into relationships where those things are needed from the other person. But also perfectionists, caretakers, and people pleasers tend to make that assumption. They make it quick because that's their tendency. So you have to sort of check some of that. Is it actually true that I'm the only person that can do this? And if you don't want to take the chance, that's fine. Like, we have a similar mechanism in our family when we've got a 98-year-old that we're caring for. Like, sometimes it's not worth the risk. Sometimes it is with that. And what perfectionists and caretakers and people pleasers aren't great at is being able to do things part way.
Yeah. No, they're gonna go the whole way.
They're gonna go whole way. Like C's get degrees.
But then the sad thing about that is too, is then there's a lot of resentment that can come from that. There's a lot of, I've seen it within my own family. I've seen it in other people's families. Like there's a lot of resentment that can come from that because you are sacrificing so much. And it's not just time or energy, it's finances, it's social, it's everything, it's health. And then meanwhile, these people are over here living their best life.
Yeah. Resentment will occur when we don't ask for what we need or we want and put boundaries in place. So you're absolutely correct. And that is on us. Okay. So, which is a little, that was a hard one for me personally. So I recognize that what I'm saying is way easier said than done. And so, but we've got to be able to accurately state what my capabilities are. What am I willing and able to do? And then we go from there. People pleasers, caretakers, and perfectionists are not very good about knowing those limits.
What if somebody calls you the S word? You're selfish.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that, yeah, I mean, listen, that hurts. Like that's being called ungrateful or selfish is probably one of the most hurtful things that I personally would be told. That I would be pretty hurt by that for sure. And that also doesn't mean that that's what's occurring. That's harder to do, to be able to say like, yeah, I bet you believe it's selfish. I bet that appears selfish to you. And I know that I am operating within my capability, or that I'm actually protecting the relationship in the long run by saying no right now. Because we'll hold it. You know this, that all of that will go straight to the pelvis.
Nuclear bomb. I mean, clenching like you're trying to crack some nuts.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know, obviously I'm a psychotherapist, so it's just everyone talking, but when we're under stress, like we clench down. And so I imagine that there would be a lot of places where that shows up in the body.
Oh yeah. I mean, when we talk about, stress over time, chronic stress, just like chronic pain, manifests as trauma, because like your body is not going to discern, well, this is stress, so we're going to put this over here. And this is pain, so we're going to put this over here. Like your body recognizes it as a threat. And any persistent threat, your body's going to recognize as a trauma and deal with it accordingly. So now from a physiologic perspective, we've got elevated cortisol levels, which is mess with all your other hormones. So, for those of you who are, stressed out consistently and are noticing pain, like that's it. There's a reason for that. For those of you who are stressed out consistently and then are having issues with sexual performance, there is a reason for that, right? And so then you get to the point where now if we get into that fight, flight, freeze. And that freeze is where we start clenching, because where are we going to run to? We still got to live life, so we're not fighting anybody, because, like, who are we fighting?
Well, and people pleasers aren't going to say it anyway.
People pleasers aren't going to anyway, right? Like they're not the ones to fight. So now they just freeze, and we start to hold and see a lot of that tension from a physiological perspective, which then manifests all number of things. So
right. And then we jump into that sort of perfectionism and caretaker piece right there. I'm not going to take the time to demonstrate to my body that I'm actually safe, to do the breathing and the relaxation techniques to tell myself I'm actually safe, because I got to go take care of someone, or I have an email I have to send, or I got to go do this instead. And then enters this really nasty cycle. And then we get into that, chronic pain, chronic illness, weird hormonal stuff that chronic illness, chronic pain folks can enter into. And so to me, it sort of doubles down on the issue once we start to notice those changes in our bodies. Once we start to have that like pain, it's very hard to get out of that cycle without addressing the perfectionism, the caretaking, and the people pleasing.
And it's funny because when people come into my office and they're seeing me and they're like, yeah, so you're a physical therapist, so we're doing physical stuff. And I'm like, yeah, talk to me about your stress. Talk to me about life. And they're like, what?
I know. I love it.
Talk to me about life. What does a typical day look like? And they cry. Like I've got 2 boxes of Kleenex on my desk and we are constantly replenishing, because the next thing that happens is the waterworks.
Yep, absolutely. And, in this particular Western culture, we have totally separated mind from body, right? And there's this belief that, oh, well, we should just like be able to manage our stress. And I'm like, it's not that clear cut. And so a lot of times for like perfectionists, caretakers, and people pleasers, they're like, of course, but there's like, what other way is there? And again, guilty of saying this like myself, like, it's just what we do as perfectionists, caretakers, and people pleasers, because we have this unrealistic expectation for ourselves, sometimes for other people, and sometimes for how healthcare works. Right. And so those unrealistic expectations also tend to be a part of that sort of profile, that perfectionism, caretaking, people pleasing. We don't have those realistic expectations. And some of that is not just like, we didn't pick it up from nowhere. Like that is in our society. Like that is the point of like marketing. Let me feel like you're missing something so I can sell you something.
Well, and the funny thing is that in terms of beginning the process to address it, what do we do with those who continue to make the excuse? Again, for anyone listening, this is not a judgment here, right?
No.
If for any reason you feel like this conversation has singled you out, then I do really think that is a sign for you to take the next step to maybe talk to someone, at least talk to someone, start to get some help and start to address these things. Because for a lot of people, there is that sense of denial. Well, it's not so bad.
Oh, yeah, because perfectionists, caretakers, and people pleasers in particular, the rationalization and the intellectualization, damn, we're good. I believe my own BS all the time.
The excuses, we are good at making some excuses, though. I could be a pro.
Here's the hardest thing to catch, in my opinion, what I call the true excuse. So it's a true thing, and it's an excuse at the same time. So a lot of times, as if we're tossing out the term excuse, we sort of think it's something made up. All right, like it's this made up thing. And I'm like, no, there's such a thing as a true excuse, right? It's a true excuse that I have 3 wild children. No, my 2 younger ones are wild. My oldest is the typical.
One's great.
My oldest one is the perfectionist, caretaker, and people pleaser. Well, we'll get some therapy for that later. So, but like, so that is true, but it's an excuse to not do the exercises that I know that I need to do to manage chronic pain. Right. It doesn't mean that I have to sometimes say no to things that maybe are for them in order for me to be well, so that I can then not, scream at them on days when I have like low temper. Right. So we want to also look out about that like true but excuse, because perfectionists, caretakers, and people pleasers have that tendency to make that quick assumption. Well, I'll just do it because no one else can do it right. Or, well, no one else is going to do it. And we make that quick assumption. And again, they might be true things, but we want to push that envelope a little bit, because if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of them, and you will resent them.
And I think that a little bit of foreshadowing is necessary, because that's such a great point you made. If you don't take care of yourself, you really are going to be no use to anybody. So the same people that you're making excuses for, you're pretty much going to be useless to them too.
Yes.
There's going to come a point when.
Yeah. So, or you won't, or you'll resent them so much you don't want to have that relationship with them. So it's a hard truth that in order to preserve a relationship, I need to say no at times. And we may get that. I think it's a very realistic expectation to think that the person is not going to like it, or may think that we're selfish for it. Like that, I don't think that part is unrealistic. What I think is unrealistic is to assume that your decision is wrong because of that. We're just looking long term here. We're looking for long-term goals, not the short term.
But that 2-letter word is like the hardest word to say. It's probably pretty much the same in many languages. And it's real easy to pronounce phonetically, right? Like you just put your tongue to the roof of your mouth and you let out the sound. No. However, it's like you go to do it and somebody has tied you down with some ropes. They have sat on you. They've put you in a cage. Like you can't get it out.
Right. Now,
why is it so hard?
Now we're getting a good idea of why the body comes into play here with the word no, right? To be able to like start to practice to relax your body as you say that word. There are I'm certainly not the end all be all on this, but some of the techniques that I think are helpful with no is to be able to practice no in situations that are really relatively low in risk, right? Like to tell the person in the drive-through, like, no, I don't want to try the new sandwich, and relax. Again, we're trying to connect the body and the mind together, right? Because they're disjointed, right? For perfectionists, caretakers, and people pleasers, their mouth will say one thing, their body will do another. We want to line that back up. So that can be, practicing on the smaller things. The spam caller comes through, pick it up just to say no. The email comes through, no, period.
Yeah. No,
there's
a complete sentence.
It's a complete sentence. One of my favorite books, it was an oldie but a goodie, is by a guy named Manuel Smith, if I recall correctly. It's like how to say no, when you feel guilty. Some variation. I apologize, I'm butchering the title, but I loved it because he gave versions of no. How to say no. Like, I'm not going to say no to my spouse the way that I say no to a telemarketer. That's not considerate. That's not thoughtful about my relationship. But we want that sort of variation. And we also want to practice what works for you as an individual, to be able to, what makes that comfortable for you? What helps your body realize that this is the right way to do it? So I encourage folks to practice on the low risk no's. Get the hang of it, see how you like it. My no is not going to be the same as your no. Start to get comfortable with that, and then we can work our way up. It's just like an exercise. We're going to start with the little and then work our way up.
One of the things I used to teach my kids when they were really little is like, it's okay to say no, but we also have to respect other people's no's. Ooh, that's hard.
Respect is the biggest rule in our household. We very much, we don't focus on language or words, but we focus on like respect. So if our children use, adult words or things like that, like that's fine as long as they are being respectful. Respectful communication is just a really highly held value in our house.
I think it's so necessary because, I remember the other day my son was upset because my daughter, his older sister, told him no. But I don't understand. And I said, sweetheart, no doesn't always feel good.
Yes.
He says no because that's where she's at right now. Okay.
Yep.
It is not your job to change that. It is your job to accept it. It is your job to respect it. And it is your job to move on. Maybe you could ask her, well, maybe if there's another time.
Yeah.
Sure. But ultimately, you're going to hear this word a lot. And I'm glad you're hearing it a lot as a kid, because when you become an adult, you need to discern, is this something I need to get riled up over or not? And most often it's not.
Yeah. Accepting no is another big one. I don't see it as much for people pleasers, caretakers, and perfectionists, but sometimes there is that fear of being told no. I want to be good enough. If you're telling me no, that means I'm not good enough for that. And so we want to get used to accepting no and giving no. So being able to give and receive no. No is not a bad word. No doesn't mean anything about you as a human. It doesn't necessarily mean anything about the relationship either. So really starting to like differentiate what's what. But yeah, being able to say no, being able to receive no, really important, particularly for perfectionist caretakers and people pleasers.
What do you think is the first step for these individuals? So we've got the no down, but particularly those with chronic illness, or with chronic pain.
So the big one I like for folks is, sometimes it can be helpful when you have trouble saying no to create a decision tree ahead of time. Okay. That's going to look different person to person. So don't take what I'm about to say that works for you necessarily. But sometimes that might mean healthcare comes first. So any appointment that comes into interaction with healthcare appointments, the healthcare always wins, right? But in that moment, that's going to be very hard for perfectionists and caretakers to say no to. So creating some decision trees, some formulas ahead of time to figure that out. The second piece I would add to that is, again, perfectionists, people pleasers, and caretakers tend to be unrealistic about their expectations. I'm going to close my door because they just started chainsawing. Okay, so unrealistic expectations, meaning like I don't schedule more than 2 doctor's appointments in a day. I don't schedule anything before 9:30 so that I can get my exercises in. The exercises are like done at very specific times. And so you really have to like really, unfortunately, think very intentionally about being able, and that's kind of where like, where like sort of the privilege of having an able body comes in. Like, you know, able bodied folks don't necessarily like, they're like, I'll go for my annual checkup. And you're like, I have to decide which specialist I'm going to see for this next 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I, you know, need to do physical therapy like once a year usually. Right. So I've got to think about how am I going to do co-pays? At what point of time can I do, you know, do the commitment for the extra attending, right? Because it's not just the hour of the appointment, it's the hour ahead of time, the hour afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, having that decision tree, you know, beforehand, and it doesn't have to be healthcare first. Like you can, you know, pick someone that you're something else first, but having that decision tree so that you're not having to say no in the moment. And then also being more realistic about what you can actually get done. So, and that's typically via a calendar, right? Are you including, I'm diabetic as well, and I'm constantly forgetting to eat. That's a big no-no. Don't do that.
Important.
Yeah, but that means that I have to be very aware, like at like, for example, you know, we started at 12, at 11, I was like, oh yeah, I eat at 12. I've got to get the food in before 12. So having some routines around the healthcare piece and paying much more attention to that, which is hard to do because it's not like the world will say, oh, you have diabetes now. Let me not put any more on your plate.
Heaven forbid.
Yeah, So I think that's a bit of a trap for us perfectionists, caretakers, and people pleasers. Like we sort of assume that folks will like know that needs to happen, or maybe that's just a me thing. Like, oh, well, I have to do all of these healthcare stuff. That means that the world should know not to bombard me with demands. But I can guarantee you, because I do sandwich caregiving, so I'm taking care of an older adult and younger children. And I joked with my sister. I was like, on Wednesdays, I can't do anything. Guess when the demands come in?
Oh, always. Wednesday.
Wednesday. Yeah.
And it has to be done on Wednesday.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, look, like, thankfully my sister is fantastic and amazing. I'm so thankful for her. But yeah, like every Wednesday, she was like, you're right. It is on Wednesdays. I was like, see? And so we have to expect that. Like, even if you set the boundary to say, I can't do anything on Wednesdays, the world will not necessarily respect that. Mm-hmm. And it may not be intentional. It may not be in their awareness, but that does mean that you got to set that boundary and enforce that boundary. But don't expect, it's unrealistic for us to expect that the world will just follow the boundary.
And that's the thing. You gotta get some boundaries. And it's hard.
Yeah.
And you might feel people may not like you, and they may not. That's a harsh reality. They may not.
Oh, yeah.
I forgot what the saying was, that the only people who don't like your boundaries are the people who can't benefit.
Yes.
Because of them. And it's true. As you start to implement boundaries, like it's like people start falling off. And I'm like, you know what? Purging is good.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you need to purge. Sometimes you need to get some people from around you because they're really not adding to your space.
No, this is the work that I love to do, because I love boundaries and I love boundary work, which again, perfectionists, caretakers, and people pleasers, this is typically one of the big treatment plan goals is to work on boundaries. And so what I tell folks, just to prepare, like when we start to do the work, very unfortunately, you will set the most beautiful, healthiest, by the Nedra Tawwab Glover book boundary. It'll be mwah, chef's kiss, beautiful. And they will react badly to it. Mm-hmm. Not because you did anything wrong, perfectionist. Because I know you perfectionist.
Now you're thinking, I did it. It was me. I'm so sorry. You know what? Take that back.
Yep. But you know what perfectionists do wrong is that they assume if they do it perfectly that the right response will occur. And that is just not true with unhealthy people, or what I consider unhealthy people. When we set healthy boundaries, unhealthy people do not like that. And and that's
with it.
Yeah, that, that's not a dig. We're all, unhealthy at some point in our life and at some time in our life. And just knowing that, like, setting healthy boundaries don't always give you the right response. Mm-hmm. But what it does do is it opens up that time and energy so that you can invest in other areas. And that's what's going to clean up your plate a little bit, because perfectionists, caretakers, and people pleasers have way too much on their plate. Their mm-hmm. plates like that. I can't remember the brand, but it was the first date, and the person put the spaghetti on this paper plate, and then the paper plate spilled over. I'm like, that is the perfect metaphor for the perfectionist, caretaker, and people pleaser plate. It is overflowing. It's not very sturdy. They're getting it all done, but there's always like something there. And so we've got to clean off some of that plate, right? The purge that you were describing. Mm-hmm. You'll know when you start to say no and start to set some healthy boundaries. That's when you'll start to own, like, oh, okay, I do have more, because I'm not going to be investing in things that don't have a good rate of return.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I just love this conversation. I think this is one that definitely needs to be ongoing. And again, if you are listening to this and you feel in your deepest spirit, like, oh my God, why are they talking about me? I urge you from a place of love to please seek out some help, because it's happened to all of us.
Yeah.
At some point in time, it's still happening to some of us, right? You know, like I always used to say, you've got to be sick and tired of being sick and tired before you make a change.
Yep.
And ultimately, if we're talking, as we circle back to health, if we're talking about your own health, taking care of behaviors that are not positive for you, setting boundaries and enforcing them. It's one thing to set them, but you have to enforce them.
Yep.
It's going to be crucial in order for you to start, taking charge of your health and of the things that are important. And mm-hmm. if somebody that claims that they love you and have your best interests at heart feel in the least bit slighted mm-hmm. or upset because you decided to do something that was not only a necessity, but in the best interest of your well-being, then I urge you to reassess that relationship.
Absolutely. And being able to, setting isn't the full story, right? It's setting and enforcing the boundary. And sometimes that's with other people. Sometimes that's with ourselves, but no one is going to look out for your physical and mental well-being as much as you will. Like, and that, listen, I'm a therapist. I treat people. I hope that I'm doing my absolute best with everyone, but no one will do that better than you. And so, healthcare providers are doing the best that they can, but they will not be able to replace your part in that. They can't tell the people in your life no. They can't. They can't make you carve out that time for those exercises. And so, no one's going to look out for you like you are. And it's an unfortunate truth, but it is a truth that we need to accept in order to create the life that we want.
Absolutely. So Jen, where can they find you?
So I work
There's
with
a lot of perfectionists now are like, I need her in my life. So you're about to be full if you're not already full. So now you're gonna have to set some boundaries.
Oh, please. Yeah, please call me. I just have a passion for this work. I love doing it. And you know, I would be so privileged to be able to help people, you know, find that balance. So reach out to www.petrichorcounseling.com. I'm sure you'll pop it in the show notes. That's our website, or you can call 470-736-9595 and schedule a consult call and speak with me, and we can talk and see if it's a good fit for you.
Awesome. It was so amazing chatting with you as always. I
Yeah.
really do hope for those of you listening that, you know, again, take what you need from these conversations. Yes. It might not apply. You may not be the perfectionist. You may have all your boundaries in check. You are doing fantastic, but I guarantee you know somebody who doesn't, right? So share this with them.
Yeah.
In love. Don't just go over there and be like, listen, you need to get your life together. Don't do them like that. Just share it in love, right? Because at the end of the day, our goal is, you know, community. Our goal is to help each other. And that's really what we strive to do, not only as clinicians, but people in general. So Jen, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This is, you know, again, my passion, and I love sharing it with people. So thank you.
Awesome. Until next time, guys, take care.
Take care.